Alright, good morning. I think it's Saturday 29th of 2021. Out rolling some hay, still got some frozen ground. Yeah, you know, I did a video a little while ago about expectations from people on quality hay. I'd like to address a few things that from a hay grower's perspective, and I feed livestock. And one thing, you know, this whole thing about what's good quality hay, the term quality for me is just too subjective. I think we should just be talking about grades of hay, like what kind of grade of hay are you actually feeding, and what kind of grade do you really need? And you know, it has to do with the species of livestock and also the class of livestock within, you know, each species. So I've got some brood cows out here. You know, let's just talk about, you know, general review. So ruminants, they you know, all the livestock we're feeding, whether it's goats, llamas, horses, cattle, their diet is designed, their digestive tract to work on forages, which are long-stemmed, fibrous type roughages. They break down those roughages in order to get the protein and energy components out of them that a human, a monogastric like us, would not be able to get, because we have a starch-based diet. These animals don't do well on starch. They do, they break down and get their energy more slowly, not just from raw starch and fats that humans need. Like if we were gonna eat grass or vegetation, even like say salads all day, we would starve to death. We wouldn't get enough energy from that. And the cows are getting some of their energy and protein from the microflora in the gut that breaks down those components into usable protein that gets absorbed in the hind gut after it leaves the forepart, you know, stomach of the rumen system. So this is a pretty simple system when you're just talking like, say, brood cows or other animals, other livestock on a maintenance diet. So, you know, like, you know, a backyard horse that gets rode occasionally or something like that. So we're just balancing, basically, simplistically, they need just a forage kept in front of them, and a lot of them, because they eat what we would consider a low quality diet that we wouldn't be able to survive on. It necessitates that they need a large amount of intake. So regardless of the grade of hay, they still should have a large volume of hay put in front of them. And cattle, you know, most ruminants, especially cattle, will eat about 8 hours a day, and then they have to stop and ruminate, regurgitate that cud, remasticate it, then it gets sent back down into the rear hind gut where the nutrients are mostly absorbed there. So now horses are not ruminants, monogastrics, but they're living on the same type of diet as cattle. But being that they're not ruminants, they have to even have a larger volume going through that gut system to get the same amount of nutrition from it. They are commonly referred to as hind gut fermenters. So they do have a cecum, which sort of in a more inefficient way imitates the rumen, where there are microbes that do break down some of that fiber. Because remember, no mammals on their own can actually digest carbohydrates like cellulose and hemicellulose. That's your fiber. And they always rely on a symbiotic relationship with the bacteria and protozoa that are in their gut. So horses will eat, I read one time, up to about 18 hours a day that horses will eat. That's why you'll see horses really graze for a long time. Cattle, you'll see them bedded down sitting under a tree chewing their cud. And same with other ruminants as well. As a general rule, most mammals need about 2% of their body weight in dry matter intake. You always talk dry matter because that standardizes everything. So when you cut hay, it's about 90% water. So you have to divide that. And most dry hay, when you're balancing out diets, I've tested a lot of hay. I don't do it anymore. It's a waste of time for me. I'm just feeding cows on pasture. Big whoop. It's about usually about 88% dry matter. So hay in the hay mouse somewhere, a lot of times it could be several months later, about 8 to 12% moisture. When we're talking about that, about 2% dry matter, cattle, sometimes feeder cattle, and you're really pushing them, and probably dairy cattle. Yeah, I don't know anything about dairy cattle. Probably, up to 3% dry matter intake of body weight. Horses, that doesn't necessarily work real well on, because as I said, they're really meant to have they do better probably on a lower grade of hay, but high volumes of it, than putting them on a high grade of hay, like a highly digestible hay, like a legume hay, like alfalfa, which is just too rich for them. Horses can do absolutely fine on alfalfa, providing they don't have laminetic issues or insulin resistance issues, like developing Cushing's syndrome as they get older. That's with like the crusty neck, a bunch of adipose fat tissue deposited there, and they have problems with that, and that creates blood disorders that relate to laminitis and things like that. But usually high protein and digestible carbohydrate hay, because the volume horses want to voluntarily intake, because they're really meant to just graze all day, that can cause some metabolic issues as they get older, because they just get too fat. And obese horses, they get sick. Again, they don't do good on super high energy diets that cattle are able to utilize. The main thing for your average horse and your average cattle is really, if you do a hay test, is really balancing out the diet based on TDN, total digestible nutrients, because that's probably the most simplistic, where TDN is a calculation that combines both digestible energy and crude protein. Normally, your average horse, cow, as well as person needs around a 7 to 8% crude protein in the diet, with based on that, usually about a 2% dry matter intake. They're going to have enough protein in their diet by far to sustain them. And that's the same even with a human diet. You hear a lot about protein all the time, which our most limiting nutrients for us is energy. We get plenty of protein in a diet. Heck, even lettuce has protein, along with meat, nuts, everything like that. But on a feedlot diet, if you're feedlot cattle can get more complicated. And that's where it might be worth really, knowing obviously what you're feeding as far as your grain mixture and ration. And usually you can use book calculations for that and add in some beef protein pellets. And if you get, you're getting above 50% concentrate diet, it starts depressing the digestibility of your forages. So with finishing cattle, you're either doing more of a forage-based system with some supplemental grain, a few pounds a day, or you go right up to an 80% grain diet, and just feeding hay as a filler to keep normal gut function. Because as I said, they can get a lot of problems with a high starch diet unless you really baby that. And then, dairy is the most complex out of anything when we're feeding livestock, and that's way out of anything I know about or going to talk about. A lot of the big dairy farms now, they're actually the ones that are forage testing. They're testing their silage, all their rations, because lots of times they're changing the components going into their ration based on what's available seasonally. And a lot of those people actually have a nutritionist that they consult with. And so do the big feedlots. But what we're doing, I really think with like your average backyard cattle and hay, testing your forage and really looking at a forage test is kind of a dog and pony show. I mean, experienced growers, you know, farmers, we know if our hay's crappy or bad. If I've got some bad bales of hay or low quality, got a lot of stem, there's a lot of non-digestible stuff here they're gonna, or stuff they just are gonna kick aside, some weeds that were in this hay. Then I'll feed more hay in there and let them high grade through the bale a little bit more. But I really don't need to forage test or anything for brood cows.